That was very interesting. Thank you guys all for coming out tonight. This is an amazing turnout. Before we even start anything, I just want to stress the importance of registering Republican for the upcoming primary. Because all of this will mean nothing if we aren't registered Republican, and we have to vote. So my name's Derek, and I'm seriously so excited to be here with you guys. I would like to begin by thanking the college Republicans, Youth for Ron Paul, the faculty and staff here at Cal State Fullerton, all my friends here. We all needed everyone's cooperation to make this possible. So tonight we have the privilege of listening to a gentleman that has dedicated his life to the service of others in both the public and private sectors. When he was called upon by his country, he served as a United States Air Force flight surgeon. As a medical physician, he delivered over 4,000 babies. And during his practice, he never accepted any payments from Medi-Cal or Medicaid. Instead, he either lowered the fees or waived them completely for those who could not afford them. He began his public service as a congressman in the late 70s and has been consistent ever since. He predicted the economic crisis and the bursting of the housing bubble.
Of course he did, dude.
In 2007, he was the only person bringing up these issues, but nobody took his warning seriously. He is the biggest advocate of America's youth, who not only have the highest unemployment rate, but will be inheriting a debt that's over $15 trillion and is rapidly rising. However, like John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, he also believes in the concept of the shining city on the hill, and that the best way to promote democracy and freedom around the world is by leading by example. By having a liberty, a sound currency, and a vibrant economy. It is my pleasure right now to introduce to you Texas Congressman, the champion of the Constitution.
Sounds like there's a revolutionary spirit in town tonight. Thank you very much. Some people think the election's coming to an end. The revolution is just getting going. Before I get started, I want to introduce my wife, Carol, and our granddaughter, Linda, sitting down here. Derek, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Thank you all for coming out. What a wonderful evening. It's really, really a pleasure, and it gives me a lot of encouragement to see such enthusiasm because the issues are so vital, so important. And I am so encouraged to know that so many young people especially are saying, you know, things have to change. We can't continue to do what we're doing, and this is what the revolution is all about. But it's a revolution that's a special revolution. It's a nonviolent intellectual revolution. It's not a brand new idea because it's more or less just a continuation of those ideas that made America great, and for some reason, unfortunately, they forgot about 100 years ago, and we need to revive that spirit of liberty once again in this country. But things have definitely changed recently, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, in the last 10 years. I've been more or less talking about some of these issues for 30 years, and I notice a big difference. But it's dramatically different in the last 5 years, because the American people have awakened and found out that we do not have a sound economic policy. And So many now realize that we don't have sound money and we need to do something about our Federal Reserve system. It sounds like a wonderful idea. Where did you ever get that idea? Now, the monetary system is very vital. If you want to really understand the cause of liberty and the purpose of liberty and sound economic policy, you have to deal with monetary policy. But also something else has happened in the last 4 to 5 years. There's been several of us in Washington trying to fight and thwart off the wars that we've gotten involved in and have a different type of foreign policy, not a foreign policy of aggression, not a foreign policy of violence, but a foreign policy that is designed with friendship and trade to all nations willing to trade and be friends of this country.
Yeah.
But for some reason, there's still a lot of people in Washington that don't quite understand that we are less respected and less liked when we invade countries, bomb countries, occupy countries, tell other people what to do, bribe their dictators. So there's another option. And the American people are hearing about it, and they're understanding it, and that is why now 75% of the American people have come to our viewpoint and said, it's time to come home. Get out of Afghanistan. Bring the troops home. So there is a definite different attitude with economic policy, the Federal Reserve, and also the foreign policy. But there's also an awakening in this country that there has been a systematic attack on our civil liberties, and we have to stand up and say no more. The purpose of government is to protect our liberty, not to destroy our liberties. For instance, the founders were very proud of the Fourth Amendment. They wanted privacy. They didn't want the king and the military coming into their homes without permission and without warrants. And yet today, we're living under a law that says that the Fourth Amendment has very little meaning, and the president and the executive branch can do just about whatever they want. This is the reason I have talked about before it was passed and since it's been passed, and I believe it should be one of the first things that we repeal once in office, and that is getting rid of the Patriot Act. But in all these areas, the American people are waking up, whether it has this attack on our personal civil liberties, whether it's our attack on our First Amendment rights, whether it's the understanding of economics, which is coming around to making more sense, as well as the foreign policy. And this is what is dramatically different. And it's dramatically different on the campuses of this country. We're getting thousands of people coming out. And if you look for the information about what is happening, guess what? The revolution is not being described on TV. But the good side of it, we have the internet. And the scary part of it is that they know it and they're trying to take the internet away from us, and we're not going to let them take the internet from us. But systematically in Washington, D.C., they want to use the internet to control and understand. They just recently built the biggest thing in the history of the world, and that is a National Security Agency compound out in Utah that can hold more records than any one establishment before. Trillions and trillions of dollars of items on all individuals in this country. They don't need that kind of information. They're supposed to do the opposite. We're supposed to have openness in government and privacy for the people, not attacking the privacy of the people. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there were quite a few. Mostly the economists that were in the Austrian economic camp were were very much aware of the financial bubble and warned about it, and sure enough, it came. Well, the financial bubble comes from the ability of the Fed to monetize debt, which is an encouragement, it's a facilitator, it's a taxer, because if governments can spend endlessly for the benefit of buying votes for the individual to stay in office, and they never have to worry about paying the bills in the near term, you can tax for a while, there's a limit you can tax, and you can borrow for a while, and then interest rates go up, but then you have this facilitator, this instrument of creating new money. And then we had this benefit of us issuing the reserve currency of the world, a trust that because the dollar used to be as good as gold. But the strange thing happened when the gold was removed in 1971, there still remained a fair amount of trust. Now they're still under the illusion in Washington that the trust will remain forever. But guess what? The trust isn't there anymore, and it's rapidly disappearing. And this is why this recession is different, and it's worldwide. There's a crisis in Europe. They admit now they're going back into recession, and of course, we haven't solved our problems because we're all facing the same problem. Government has gotten too big. They fight too many wars. They undermine liberties, write too many regulations, and manipulate the economy too much. So the predictable crises come, and guess what they do in Washington? Congress, the executive branch, the Federal Reserve, they say, oh, we're in trouble now, so what we need to do is spend more money, borrow more money, have more regulations, and let the Fed print money endlessly. How can you solve the problem? You cannot solve the problem of too much spending and too big a government by spending more and making the government bigger. You have to do the opposite.
Yeah!
So, next year is going to be an important year. It'll be the anniversary of something that happened in 1913, and that will be the appropriate year. On the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, we will repeal the Federal Reserve.
Yeah!
And if we get the country to come around to really understanding what personal liberty is all about, they will realize what Jefferson talked about, that we have a God-given right to our life and our liberty, and we ought to have a God-given right to keep the fruits of our labor as well.
Yeah!
Which means the 16th Amendment needs repealed just as well. Give the incentive to the people to work and keep what they earn. Believe me, they will work harder. Today, productive energy is not released in this country. If somebody really wants to get productive, how many jobs are going overseas? There's a lot of U.S. companies right now that are adding jobs, but when you look at it, the jobs are being added overseas. So there is so much we can do here to encourage individuals to come back. The tragedy here in this country is if you're on the receiving end, if you know the inside track, you get the benefits as the bubble is being blown up, and then when the crunch comes, guess what? They get bailed out. We need to stop all the bailouts. They don't deserve the bailout. A lot of this has come about mainly because of a misunderstanding of the entitlement system. The entitlements sounds like an entitlement is a right, but an entitlement isn't a right. You have a right to your life. You have a right to ownership of your life. You have a right to your liberty. You should have the right to the fruits of your labor. But entitlement means that you're entitled to somebody else's life or somebody else's productive effort, somebody else's wealth. No, you don't have that. But it's always well-intended to say, well, this is only for the poor people, the people falling through the cracks, and they're entitled to own a house. And, of course, that led to the housing bubble. And they're entitled to free food and free education on down. But there is no such thing as free stuff. You have to take it from somebody. So it reminds me of my little bumper sticker in Washington, D.C. It says, simply, don't steal. The government hates competition. But the entitlement system, although has been designed, and many people believe, and they're very sincere, and they say, we do care about our fellow man, and we want to make sure that nobody's poor, and we're going to take care of it. But guess what? The entitlement system takes care of the wealthy. It's the Goldman Sachs of the world, the banking system, the military-industrial complex, the whole mess. They feel entitled, and they throw the crumbs to the poor, and then when there's a crisis, the rich get bailed out, and the poor get poorer, the middle class loses their jobs, and they end up losing their houses as well. So this is the reason why we have to challenge the whole notion of the entitlement system. You're entitled to your freedoms, and the government should be protecting your liberties, not pretending it can redistribute wealth and create wealth by doing it. It destroys wealth under those conditions.
Yeah.
So very simply, in order to restore a sound economy and get jobs back here again, I think we should cut spending. But that's such a strange idea in Washington. Even our side of the aisle has a proposal to look like they're cutting spending, but they're only cutting proposed increases. In the next 10 years, the proposed increases are about $10 trillion. So if they cut them down to $9 or $8 trillion, say, oh look, we just cut $2 trillion. I want to cut $1 trillion of real money in the first year in office.
Yeah.
A lot of people worry about it, and they say, oh, won't that cause a crash in the economy, and this will really wreck things? You can't do that. But what about saving all this money on the wars? Wouldn't that be a good place to start? In the last 10 years, there was $4 trillion added to our debt by fighting these wars overseas. Now, the founders had a good way of restraining us from getting involved in war. They simply wrote into the Constitution that only Congress can declare the war, and which means that Congress is the closest to the people, so the people have a say through their congressmen whether or not we will make this precise declaration of going to war. Since World War II, we haven't done it. Since World War II, we haven't won a war. Since World War II, we've spent trillions of dollars and loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of thousands of people injured. And just think of the tragedy of the injured that's coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan now. If you look at what kind of lives that we have lost in the last 10 years since 9/11, Americans, soldiers and contractors, we've lost 8,500. That's not a fair deal. I understand 9/11 very, very well, but going into a policy where we spend a lot of money, bankrupt ourselves, and a lot of Americans get killed, that's not very good payback. We need to wise up and have a different type of foreign policy.
Yeah.
So declaring war on the world by a global war on terrorism is a monstrous thing to deal with, but by marching around the world believing that we have the moral authority to bomb any country, any place, because there might be a terrorist hiding behind a bush, and having secret weapons, and having drone missiles directed from individuals in the United States and going over, and guess what? We make mistakes. I mean, do we know that we kill the right people? No. We know that a lot of children and a lot of innocent people die, and we know that every time you kill one over there under those circumstances, you probably create another 100 who's saying, why are we being terrorized by bombs falling out of the sky? We haven't done anything to the Americans.
Yeah.
So there's every reason in the world why we can cut a lot of money out of the military. We can have priorities. If we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to bring in the destruction of the currency, and even the Social Security recipients and the elderly getting medical care and the children's health care and education program, they will come crashing down, because when the money doesn't work, nothing works. So we could work our way out of it, but we can't do it by spending more money and printing more money. It won't work, and I think the American people know it, that it can't work.
Yeah.
So my idea of cutting $1 trillion sends a message that we're going to get our house in order. We can start with overseas spending. We don't need to give away foreign aid. I'm convinced that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries.
Yeah.
And it ends up to be a political football, and it doesn't help the people it's supposed to help over there. It helps the government. And besides, if we're a very wealthy country and doing well and setting an example, we as individuals can decide where to send our money and help the people truly in need. And even in the midst of this recession, the American people have been very generous. There's still crises around the world, and the American people come. It's so much better than depending on government bureaucrats and special interests doing these kind of things. So we can make these cuts. If we do this, the other suggestion I have is going back to the '06 budget. And the government wasn't too small in 2006. It was still rather big, so it's not like we're destroying the whole government. We're just going back to a more modest time and getting rid of a few departments, like, say, 5 of them to begin with. I don't think we need the Department of Energy passing out ethanol benefits to anybody, so there's a lot of things that we could do to spend a lot less money. And if we did that, we don't have to start. And I think politically, it's a mistake to start on child health care or food for poor people or the elderly health care. Now, those programs theoretically shouldn't have started, and they're not working. If we continue to do this, they're all going to come crashing down. But if we want to work our way out of it, we have to say where we're going to cut, and we should get the people, right, left, center, independents, to agree that coming home and stop spending this money overseas during these wars would be the easiest place. Cut these others and try to preserve these programs and let people get weaned off. For instance, I think it would be just great if we did this and offered everybody that's coming out of college right now and having a tough time, if you wanted to assume responsibility for yourself, to stay out of the Social Security system and keep your own money and take care of yourself.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
The founders were rather clear about the foreign policy. Their strong suggestion was that we have friendship and trade with as many countries as possible, any that are willing. Now, so often I will be charged, and you will as well, and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists. You don't want to deal with the world. Oh, yeah, we want to trade with the world. We want to travel. We want to go back and forth. We want to engage. And the individuals who have the sharpest criticism and call us isolationists are the ones who are the very first ones to put on sanctions on countries trying to start another war.
Yep.
And they're the very same people who won't even entertain the thought that it's time to start talking to the Cubans and travel to Cuba and no more sanctions on Cuba. I think when big, rich countries like ours that have all the military might more than all the other countries get together, and we intimidate small little countries, third world countries, with sanctions and threats, I think it's a sign of insecurity. We shouldn't be insecure. We have so much strength, but we will become insecure if we continue to do this, because our economy will not sustain us. Big governments and empires and countries that overextend overseas are usually never defeated militarily, and we're not going to be defeated militarily. We have the military might, but just think, in our lifetime, I mean, the Soviets didn't have to be defeated. When I was in the Air Force in the 60s, believe me, it was a pretty hot Cold War at the time, and we had the missile crisis in Cuba and these other things. But the way the Soviets were defeated, they defeated themselves, and when they were defeated for economic reason, they collapsed upon themselves. And that is what's happening to this country. The biggest threat is here at home. It's not foreign. It's domestic. But ultimately, the real test is looking at our individual lives and how the government is controlling us as individuals, and what is our personal liberties all about. And this is where I think we're slipping so rapidly away from what was intended. And so many people have been willing to say, well, I know I have to give up some of my freedoms to be safe. And I would like to suggest you never have to and never should give up any of your liberties for safety and security. But this certainly came up after 9/11 and the rapid passage of the Patriot Act. The congressman I was sitting next to when we were voting on the Patriot Act, he was voting for it, and we only had it on the floor about an hour or so. The bill had been around for a long time in one form or another, years, but they couldn't get the consensus to pass it. So after 9/11, the consensus was there. Oh, we have to do something. We have to do something. I said, why are you voting for this? You don't even know what's in it. He says, I know. I said, you know there's going to be some bad stuff in this. He says, yeah, I know that. I said, why are you going to vote for it? He says, how am I going to go home and explain to my constituents that I voted against the Patriot Act right after 9/11?
Mind control.
I said, that is what your job is. Go vote right and go home and explain it to them what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But instead, we have continued the process. Not only has it been the Patriot Act, we have the part of the National Defense Authorization Act, where the military now is authorized to arrest American citizens held in secret without an attorney and indefinitely. So let's put that high on the list for repeal as well. Of course, once we get in the repealing mood, we'll repeal that Obamacare as well. And if we repeal government care, what we have to do is get the government out of the way and allowing you to make your own decisions about your medical care. That is, get the government and the drug companies out of your way for picking alternative health care and nutritional products and vitamins. We want to advance the cause of liberty to such an extreme that we want to return to the times when we were allowed to drink raw milk if we wanted to. And if an individual happens to be ill and have heard that growing certain substances in their backyard can help them, do it. And make sure that under these conditions, both left and right should understand something about states' rights. The federal government has no right to come in and overrule the laws of California that permit you to do such things. All this nanny state legislation we have is based on the assumption that the government can protect you against yourself. The government can't protect us against ourselves, and if it tries, it does it at the expense of liberty. One. Okay, I think it's I thought I would have to suspend my speech, and I'm just getting started. Now, what we want people to do is make up their own minds about how they live their lives with one very strict rule. You can't hurt other people. You can't take other people's property. But it's your life. But another basic premise of this is that if you mess up, it's your responsibility, and you can't go begging your neighbor or forcing your neighbor to take care of you. But you know, in many ways, we accept this. This is very clear, you know, when it comes to some very important issues like our spiritual life. I'm trying to understand the hereafter. We believe the government has nothing to say about this. So we can practice our religion the way we want, the various religions. The government should stay flat out of it. And if a person chooses not to practice a religion, that also should be legal in this country, too. sometimes bizarre things come out of religious beliefs. Sometimes very, very bizarre, dangerous things come out of intellectual beliefs and political beliefs. But we don't outlaw political beliefs. We're still allowed to read them and study them. How do we counteract bad political views? With the correct and positive political views. That's how we do it.
Yep.
But why is it that we as a nation have accepted the notion that as soon as it comes to putting something in our bodies or in our lungs, we have accepted the notion that the government has authority over us, telling us now what to eat and drink and how much salt to have, the whole thing. What happened to us? Why are we such wimps? Why don't we take our liberty back?
Yeah!
There are some who believe that if we don't have government doing this for us, that there will be so much suffering and there will be too many poor people and too many people will use their liberties irrationally and do harm to themselves. But if that would be the case, then you would have to have an army pestering us on a daily basis. And unfortunately, that's what we have. It's called the TSA and the Department of Homeland Security. So we need more confidence in ourselves to know that liberty is supposed to be all in one package. Personal liberty, social liberty is the same as economic liberty. Why should somebody defend the right of the property ownership and then declare that you can't smoke or drink certain substances? It's still the same principle. Then there are others that say, oh yes, I defend your right, your freedom of speech and what you put into your bodies, but boy, I can't let you spend your own money the way you want. It's one and the same. It got divided up 100 years ago. We need to put it together by understanding where our liberties come from. They don't come from our government. They're ours to be used, and it is ours, and the government is there to be limited to protecting those liberties.
Yeah!
A law was passed just recently, and it said that if you happen to be protected by Secret Service, and by the way, I'm not protected by the Secret Service, you know.
Yeah!
Now, if you are the individuals protected by Secret Service, you're a very, very special person, and if anybody gets within a certain distance of you, 10 or 15 feet, and holds up a sign and demonstrates, that you can get 10 years for that. First thing is you're supposed to allow to be able to demonstrate, and people who think they're so special, they shouldn't have special rights. Rights should be equal for everybody, not just... That, of course, is what's so wonderful about the freedom message, is that it should bring us together if we understand what it's all about. It should bring people together because of the issue of freedom. Freedom is what should bring us together, not the way we use our freedom. So if somebody has the freedom to use their money and they waste their money, that should be their problem. It shouldn't be our job to tell them what to do. Same way in a social sense. If people practice certain practices that you don't like and you're annoyed by, just ignore them if they're not forcing you or hurting you. Freedom, and when people have their freedoms and they use them a certain way, it doesn't mean that you endorse what they do. You just endorse the principle of freedom. That is the reason crowds that come together like this are diverse in the way they think about their religion, the way they think about intellectual matters, the way they think about personal habits as well. You know, in a truly free society, if you carried this out, a truly free society would recognize the legality of practicing socialism as long as it's voluntary. Anybody who wants to have a socialist society, and there's been examples of this in our history, if they want to have a collective, fine and dandy. But But when there's a collective, when there's dependency and a redistribution of wealth, how often do they come along and say, oh, if a group of you want to live in a truly free society and be exempt from the onerous tax codes and the wars that are happening, they don't allow this to happen. But a free society protects liberty, but it also protects those who want to have voluntary socialism. The freedom movement had a setback, 100 years ago or so, and all the changes in the progressive era. But that test of freedom was really the best test ever. Freedom is a young idea. It's a new idea. It hasn't been practiced for thousands of years. And those who argue, like a certain economist argued with me this week that I was going back... That I was going back a whole 100 years, but the truth is, he was, and they who argue us going back to 100 years, they who promote tyranny want to go back thousands of years, because that's what history has been all about.
I watched that interview. I couldn't believe that they just sat there.
So what we want to do is pick up the pieces intellectually and find out where we went astray and refine it. We don't want to go back to the 19th century gold standard. It was imperfect. We can do better. The understanding of the market is more refined than since Adam Smith. The modern day Austrian economists know a lot more about how the market works. And also foreign policy. It's much better understood than certainly it was for these past 50 years, and the disaster that it's been bringing to us, the tragedy has been bringing to us, so that all of these things can be improved upon and move forward. That is what I think is happening. That is why I am so positive that there is a revolutionary spirit going on in this country, and it's spreading, and there's no army in the world that can stop the spread of an idea.
Yeah!
Our time has come, and it won't be stopped. There'll be bumps, it'll be up and downs, and all. We don't know what this week will bring, and next week with primaries, and next in August. We don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. That, on the short range, you might not make the predictions. But on the long range, if we pursue this course, and we are determined, we will change this country, we will change the concept of liberty, not only in this country, but throughout the world.
Yeah!
You know, after the Vietnam War finally ended in the early 70s, after so much tragedy, we had a colonel, Harry Summers, got together with a colonel from Vietnam to sort of clean up the mess, and his name was Colonel 2. And they got together, and our colonel, Harry Summers, wanted to make a point, maybe the last stab. He says, well, anyway, Colonel, he says, you have to admit, you never defeated us on the battlefield. And 2 said, he says, you're right. He says, but it's also irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant if you lose a battle, but you win the war. So we may lose a battle here and there, but we are going to win the war because we're on the right side of history. We're on the right side of these ideas, and we can win the hearts and minds of people who want to have and live in a free society. Also reminds me of the 1960s. There used to be a saying that if you weren't a liberal when you were 20, you didn't have a heart. But if you weren't a conservative by the time you were 40, you didn't have a brain. So I think our philosophy says, why can't you have a heart and a brain together? That's what freedom's all about. But in a revolution, you have to strive for what seems like the impossible and put the energy into it. You have to have passion. You have to use reason. It's emotion and it is passion, but it also has to make sense. The reason, it has to have reason behind it. Think of the individuals behind the revolution, our revolution. They said for 100 years they talked and studied and understood what property rights were, and they were well versed, much more so than so many of us are today. But the revolution, the intellectual revolution that we're talking about has occurred now for several decades. It didn't just pop up 4 years ago. What's popping up now is the translation of the intellectual movement is popping up in the political atmosphere now. And but for 30 or 40 years, we've had these think tanks, these people writing, and more professors than ever teaching sound economics. So the groundwork has been laid, and that is why it's coming about now, and we're seeing this. We just don't know the timing. The one thing that we know for certain, if we sit on our hands and we do nothing, there will be the bankruptcy, and those people I was going to say something else, but I'll call them people. Those people in Washington who are in charge will not give up their power easily. So this is the reason that is up to all of us. Every one of us has a job to do, one way or the other. Everybody's job is maybe vary from one to another. Some people will be very involved in politics and campaigning and running for office and teaching and writing and working on the internet. But it is most important that we study and understand so that we can defend it intellectually and not be put down and be told that we don't care about people. Because if we I believe we all do have humanitarian instincts, if you have these instincts, there's only one way you can take care of the maximum number of people with the maximum benefits, and that's through a free society. History proves that. Pursue this with diligence, I believe the results can exceed expectations. I really never expected a whole lot in my political career. Matter of fact, I didn't even expect a political career. I just wanted to get a few things off my chest. And therefore, I wanted to just lay it out on the table, and I was sort of pessimistic and thinking, well, not many people would listen. But I did talk to a lot of people in my congressional district, and they were receptive to these ideas. Now the audiences are bigger, and the crowds are more energized. The message is being spread, and this energy that's coming from the younger generation, the incorporation of all age groups now, and with the use of the internet, all this is coming together, and the need is so great. I think the last 4 years, things have accelerated because of the need. People are sick of the world wars, and they're sick of the spending. They know these debts are horrible, and the students coming out of college, they may have a huge debt and no job, and they know there's something deeply flawed with the system and that we need to change it.
Yeah!
Thomas Paine said the harder the conflict and the harder the job is, the more glorious is the victory. So it will be difficult, and the work will be hard, but if you sort of accept what I'm saying, you cannot be comfortable unless you pursue it. You'll have to do something, because you're in a minority. It isn't never 51% who get up and say, okay, we all understand it now. The founders, the people who orchestrated our revolution, some people said it was 3 or 5 or 7%. And yet most people will listen to others who have studied, understood, and influenced other people. So that burden falls on individuals who say, I know there's something wrong, and I think I have it, put it together, and I know what's wrong. It's a great idea. It's an American idea. It's a moral idea. It's a constitutional idea. And that obligations fall on us to do our very best to bring this country together, because the message of freedom is popular. It brings us all the diverse elements in a society together to strive for this one goal, and that is to live in a free country. For me personally, living in a free country means that this is the best opportunity to strive for excellence and virtue. This should be a personal goal for satisfaction's sake. Some people get a lot of satisfaction from different things, but the one thing, though, working hard and taking care of a family and being prosperous is satisfying. But if that is the only goal in life, it doesn't work so well. I think that is one thing that happened to us in a country, is when we were so prosperous and so wealthy, we concentrated on the materialism. We used government to use force to redistribute wealth and take care of the special interests, and we forgot about where wealth came from. And now wealth isn't there. The money is not sound. The economy is not sound. So once again, if we want to live in a prosperous country, we have to think about where prosperity comes from. And it comes from work. It comes from work and effort and savings. This idea that savings are silly, that liberal economists will tell you, that is silly. Savings is worthwhile, working hard and having a product and having a service to give. This is what makes capitalism and free markets work. And it isn't the fact that government redistributes wealth or think that they can get wealth out of a printing press. It doesn't work. But we're in an age now where there's not a whole lot of confidence in government. And you say, well, isn't that terrible? No, I think it's great because if you don't have confidence in the type of government we have now and what we've had, I think that's the beginning of wisdom. You challenge things, and we still have enough freedoms to challenge. We have enough freedoms to come here. Sometimes I'm not quite sure that the elected process is perfect or not, but it's the only thing we have to work with right now. But it does annoy me to no end that when we have a foreign policy that says that what we need to do is promote democracy around the world by force, that we make, like Wilson said, we have to make the world safe for democracy. So we gather up our men and women, we send them overseas, we invade country, we occupy, and we say, we're gonna make you have elections like Americans have. We're gonna make you Democrats and keep voting. So sometimes they ended up actually having elections. Then they elect the wrong people and we won't accept the election. But here in this country, it is sometimes very difficult, and competing. So that the two-party system is deeply flawed, and having true competition is very, very difficult.
Yep. Two-party system is good. We need to get rid of the parties altogether.
But people now, when they understand this issue, right now the vehicle has to be in the political system. And someday maybe that can be improved. But we still have enough freedom. I think the internet obviously is very, very important. And being involved, the spreading of ideas. If I had one thing that is the most important to carry on a revolution, is the spreading of ideas. And even in the original days of the founding, they've spread ideas by writing letters and pamphleteering, and sometimes they just did it on their own. They didn't have any other vehicle. So the spreading of ideas is key, but acting out afterwards. There are some of my friends who know and understand and think spreading of ideas and intellectually is the only thing that counts, and politics don't count. But eventually, spreading of ideas is important, but eventually you have to have political action. The founders practiced political action. They knew the fundamentals of what tyranny, the bad parts of tyranny, and they wanted to change. So they were able to translate that into demanding their freedoms, and that is why we were introduced to a society that we've had. So we have been blessed, but if we don't do something, we will lose it. And I think this is what the people are understanding in this country like never before, that we're on the edge of something where it's not going to be maintained. The world financial system is worse than anything, in my estimation, in the history of the world, because it's a global economy like never before. It's based on a single fiat currency, the dollar, like never before. Debt is unbelievable, and just because we've been taught in school that debts don't matter, and if you have problems with debt, you get more, try to tell that to a student that's getting out and has debt and says, oh, that's okay, you don't have a job, but you have this debt, you have to run up some more debt, go get another credit card. We know that doesn't work, and it doesn't work for a country either. It doesn't work for the entire world either. Some people think the solution is only dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's sort of a pet peeve. If there's a vote on the House floor of cutting back waste and fraud, of course, I'm gonna vote for it. But that isn't the problem. Government by nature is wasteful and fraudulent and abusive.
Yeah.
So you have to expect it. It is the fact that a program might be wasteful and fraudulent, but taking the money from somebody was fraudulent too. Or debasing the currency and inflating the currency, that's fraudulent too. So it is, if you concentrate and say the program is okay, but we just need better bureaucrats in there and better politicians to better manage it, it won't work. I've heard that too many times, and there's been too many bills passed. It doesn't do a thing. Even though in theory you can support it, but that isn't the issue. It's the issue of government. What should the role of government be? And that is the question we have to ask ourselves. The founders asked that question. They came with a conclusion. The solution isn't complex. It isn't 37 things that we can do. It's only one. The purpose of government should be to protect our liberties. That's it. In a very limited way, that means the government has the responsibility to give us honest money and not counterfeit the money, and to protect property rights, to protect contract rights, not to dictate contracts and interfere with contracts like they did after the bankruptcy. They interfered and purposely broke contracts. When the Depression hit, the contracts with the government and private industry with the promise to pay in gold, the government and the courts came along and said, oh, you don't have to. So they did exactly the opposite of what they're doing. And today they're supposed to protect our privacy, and they don't. They protect their secrecy. So we have to know what the role of government ought to be. It is to protect our liberties, which means that under our Constitution, that means you have a strong national defense. And I think that is good. But just buying more weapons when we don't need more weapons, how many more weapons do we need? We have more than everybody else put together, and nobody's going to invade us. You know, I don't think we need these more weapons. What we need is a wiser foreign policy, and one design where it's very limited in a republic, the protection of liberty, protecting the marketplace, protecting your right to run your life as you see fit, and a foreign policy which means friendship and trade with people. Believe me, under those circumstances, I think we would have the greatest chance for peace and prosperity. That should be our goal. Thank you very much.